Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session on qualitative data analysis. As graduate students, you will likely encounter qualitative data in your research, and it's important to understand how to analyze this type of data effectively. Qualitative data analysis is an important part of conducting a qualitative study. It requires careful attention to detail, a deep understanding of the data, and a commitment to rigor and transparency. By the end of this session, you will better understand what coding is, why it is important, and how it can be used to support your qualitative research. Qualitative data analysis is a critical part of conducting a qualitative study, and its purpose is to identify patterns, themes, and relationships in the data collected. Qualitative data is often unstructured and descriptive, and it can take the form of text, images, or audio. Using qualitative data analysis, researchers aim to understand participants' experiences, perspectives, and meanings of a particular phenomenon or issue. The first step in qualitative data analysis is the coding process. Coding involves systematically categorizing and labeling data, which is essential to organizing and making sense of the information you have collected. During the coding process, you will identify patterns and themes from the data, and you will use these patterns and themes to develop a deeper understanding of your research questions and objectives. So, what is coding? In qualitative data analysis, coding categorizes and organizes data into meaningful units for analysis. It helps to reduce the complexity of the data, making it easier to identify patterns and themes. By breaking down the data into smaller, more manageable units, you can start to see relationships and connections between different pieces of information. Coding provides a structure for organizing and making sense of the information you have collected, which is essential for conducting thorough and rigorous data analysis. It can help you identify patterns and themes in the data, inform your analysis, and provide a foundation for your findings. There are three main types of qualitative coding: open coding, axial coding, and selective coding. So when might you use each type of coding in your qualitative research? Open coding is often used in the data analysis process's early stages when you are starting to make sense of the information you have collected. Axial coding is used to develop a deeper understanding of the relationships and connections between different categories of data, and it is often used after open coding. Selective coding is used to identify the central concept or themes that emerge from the data, and it's often used in the later stages of data analysis process. Let us take a closer look at each type of coding and discuss its purpose and process. Open coding is breaking down the data into smaller, more manageable units and categorizing them into meaningful groups. Open coding aims to identify patterns and themes that emerge from the data and to develop a preliminary understanding of the information you have collected. The process of open coding involves reading through the data and identifying relevant categories and subcategories, which can then be organized into a coding framework. For instance, let's say a researcher is conducting interviews with patients who have recently been diagnosed with a chronic illness. The researcher might use open coding to analyze the transcripts of these interviews, highlighting significant statements or phrases related to the patient's experiences. By grouping these statements into codes, the researcher can identify common themes and patterns, such as emotional responses to the diagnosis, challenges in managing the illness, and coping strategies. Axial coding is the process of linking categories and subcategories together to form a more comprehensive understanding of the data. The purpose of axial coding is to identify relationships and connections between different categories of data and to develop a deeper understanding of the information you have collected. The axial coding process involves reviewing the categories and subcategories developed in open coding and identifying their relationships and connections. For example, let us say a researcher is conducting interviews with employees to explore their experiences working in a particular organization. After completing the initial open coding phase, the researcher has identified several themes, including job satisfaction, work-life balance, and leadership. In the next stage of analysis, the researcher might use axial coding to identify sub-themes within each of these categories, such as workload, relationships with colleagues, and opportunities for growth and development. Selective coding is the process of focusing on a particular category or theme you have identified in the data and using it to develop a comprehensive understanding of the information you have collected. Selective coding involves focusing on a particular category or theme and using it as a lens through which to analyze the rest of the data. Let's say a researcher is conducting a study on teachers' experiences in low-income schools. After conducting open and axial coding, they have identified several categories, including lack of resources, student behavior management, and professional development opportunities. In the final analysis stage, the researcher might use selective coding to identify a core category that connects and integrates these categories, such as teacher retention in low-income schools. The researcher might then use this category to develop the conceptual framework that explains the experiences of teachers in low-income schools and the relationships between the different categories and subcategories. For example, researchers might explore how the lack of resources and challenging student behavior management impact teacher burnout and job satisfaction, and how professional development opportunities can contribute to teacher retention. By using selective coding to identify a core category and develop the conceptual framework, the researcher can provide a more comprehensive and integrated understanding of the data and the teacher's experiences. This can also help identify areas for future research or interventions to improve the retention of teachers in low-income schools. The coding process is a critical part of qualitative analysis. It involves several steps, including reading and reviewing the data, identifying codes, categorizing codes into themes, and refining themes. The coding process is important in qualitative data analysis, but presents several challenges. Understanding the challenges in the coding process and how to address them can help you analyze this type of data effectively. Some of the most common challenges researchers face in coding include working with large amounts of data, overcoming researcher bias, and ensuring trustworthiness. Analyzing copious amounts of data can be a challenge in coding, especially when the data is unstructured and complex. This can make it difficult to identify patterns and themes and to categorize the data into meaningful units for analysis. One suggestion for overcoming the challenge of dealing with large amounts of unstructured and complex data in coding is to use software tools designed specifically for qualitative data analysis. However, it is important to note that while software tools can help manage and analyze large amounts of qualitative data, they should not be seen as a replacement for careful and thoughtful data analysis by human researchers. It is still essential to review and verify the outputs generated by the software to ensure their accuracy and relevance to the research question. Overcoming researcher bias is another common challenge in the coding process. Researchers may unconsciously bring their own biases and perspectives to the coding process, which can impact the accuracy and reliability of the analysis. One suggestion for overcoming this challenge is using a team-based coding and analysis approach. By involving multiple researchers in the coding process, each with their perspectives and experiences, it is more likely that biases will be identified and challenged. Researchers can provide different viewpoints and interpretations of the data, which can help prevent the influence of any individual's biases. In a team-based approach, researchers can review each other's coding and interpretations, provide feedback, and engage in discussions to arrive at a more objective and nuanced analysis. This technique can help to identify potential biases and ensure that the coding process is transparent and rigorous. It is also critical to be aware of one's biases and to engage in reflective practice throughout the coding process. Researchers can reflect on their assumptions and preconceptions, consciously challenge their biases, and seek alternative interpretations of the data. By using a team-based approach and engaging in reflective practice, researchers can work towards a more objective and confirmable analysis and reduce the impact of researcher bias on the coding process. Ensuring trustworthiness in the coding process is essential and requires both dependability and credibility. Dependability refers to the coding process's consistency, while credibility refers to its accuracy and truthfulness. To achieve this, researchers can use intercoder reliability techniques, where multiple researchers independently code a subset of the data and compare their codes to assess consistency and accuracy. Researchers can randomly assign the data to different coders who use the same coding scheme, and the codes are then compared using Cohen's kappa. High agreement between the coders indicates dependability and credibility, while low agreement requires reviewing discrepancies and addressing coding schemes or coder training issues. Intercoder reliability techniques can enhance consistency and accuracy, increase dependability and credibility, and identify areas for improvement. Here's an example of a coding scheme. This one is selecting plants to be delivered to the botanical garden. In this scenario, the task is to select plants for delivery to the botanical garden. A researcher can use the codes on the screen to categorize and analyze the data. Researchers can use these codes in the following ways. A gardener can use the type of plant to determine the mix of plants that will be delivered to the botanical garden. The gardeners can use light and water requirements to determine the best location for each plant in the garden. Gardeners can use soil type to ensure that the plants are delivered to an area with appropriate soil conditions. They can use bloom time to ensure continuous display of blooms throughout the year. The gardener can use height and width to determine the plants are spaced appropriately in the garden. Gardeners can use the hardiness zone to ensure that the plants are suitable for the climate in the area. Popularity and price can help determine which plants are in high demand and which are more affordable. Using these codes, the researcher can categorize and analyze the data to make informed decisions about which plants to deliver to the botanical garden. Evaluating research findings is a critical step in the research process. Researchers must synthesize the findings, make connections, and establish their significance. Synthesizing findings involves summarizing the key themes and patterns identified from the data to understand the overall picture. The next step is to make connections between themes, identifying the relationships and complexity within the data. To establish the finding's significance, researchers must consider the research question's implications. Being critical and reflective is also necessary to acknowledge limitations, evaluate data accuracy and validity, and be transparent about how they affect the results and conclusions. This approach ensures a precise analysis of the data and a comprehensive understanding of the information the researchers gathered. Presenting research findings is a critical step in the research process, and it is essential to present the findings in a clear and concise manner. This approach helps to ensure the audience easily understands the findings and the researcher communicates effectively. There are several different ways in which researchers can present research findings, including narratives, tables, graphs, and visual aids. Narratives are written descriptions of the findings and provide a detailed account of the study's results. Tables and graphs are visual representations of the findings and help summarize the information clearly and concisely. Visual aids such as images, videos, and animations can help illustrate the results and make the presentation more engaging. Ensure your findings are accessible and understandable to a wider audience. This approach helps ensure that your research has a broader impact and is also a requirement of academic integrity. There are several different ways in which research findings can be communicated, including academic publications, conference presentations, and public engagement activities. Academic publications, such as journal articles, provide a forum for sharing research findings with an audience of scholars and researchers. Conference presentations allow researchers and practitioners to present research findings to a professional audience. Public engagement activities, such as community presentations and workshops, provide a platform for sharing research findings with the community. As we look at the text, we are going to respond to the question, what shapes my research agenda and what am I hoping to convey with my findings? To be a successful researcher, it is crucial to understand what shapes your research agenda and the message you want to convey through your findings. Your research questions, literature, and interests influence your research agenda, which must align with your goals as a researcher. When reporting your findings, consider your intended audience and how your research can contribute to your field and society. During qualitative research, engage in dialogue with other scholars, consider your audience, and represent participants respectfully, avoiding judgment. Considering how language, culture, and context shape the study's findings ensures that participants are respected ethically and mindfully. What forms of authority do I use to make my case? What mediates these choices? When presenting qualitative findings, researchers can use various forms of authority to support their case. These include empirical authority, which involves using data and evidence, theoretical authority, which draws on existing theoretical frameworks, and personal authority, which involves using the researcher's expertise and experience. Which forms of authority to use when presenting qualitative findings depend on various factors, such as the audience, research question, and research goals. Researchers should use authority ethically and transparently, indicating which forms of authority they are using and how they use them to provide a clear and accurate representation of the data and the research process. To what extent do I allow theory to inform, frame, and challenge analysis and interpretation? The researcher's theoretical approach will depend on the research question, the research design, and the data itself. In some cases, a theory may provide a framework for understanding the data and developing research questions. For example, a researcher conducting a study on the experiences of low income families may use social capital theory to guide the analysis and interpretation of the data, focusing on how social networks and resources impact the family's experiences. In other cases, a theory may challenge existing assumptions or understandings of the data. For example, a researcher conducting a study on workplace harassment may use feminist theory to highlight power imbalances and systemic issues that may not be immediately apparent in the data. Using theory in qualitative research is not a one-way process. The data can also inform and challenge existing theoretical frameworks. Researchers should prepare themselves to modify or adapt their theoretical frameworks in response to the data and be receptive to emerging themes and patterns that existing theories may not have predicted. In what ways did I seek disconfirming evidence? How can I do more of this? Seeking disconfirming evidence helps ensure the data's analysis and interpretation are rigorous and valid. By actively seeking out evidence that challenges or contradicts the researcher's initial assumptions, the researcher can help to guard against bias and ensure their findings are robust and reliable. To seek disconfirming evidence, researchers can actively seek exceptions or counterexamples to their initial assumptions, use a variety of data sources and methods to triangulate the findings, and use peer review and feedback to challenge and refine their ideas. This concludes today's presentation. Thank you so much for listening.